right, very good. Thank you, Sarah. Just a few additional footnotes here. Sarah pointed out that Kant is a synthesizer, and that's the first thing you want to have in your mind. And he's synthesizing these great traditions that we've been talking about. Rationalism and empiricism. If you can think of these as two great streams that come down through philosophical history, sort of at war with each other. You know? Plato versus Aristotle, Parmenides versus Heraclitus. So on, down through the centuries, there's been this war going on between these two general perspectives, one emphasizing that we get our certainty about things from the mind, and the other saying we get it more from sensory experience. So you understand all that. So if I asked you, Jacob, you're in the wrong spot. Good heavens, I'm sorry. If I asked you, Joe, to give me a couple of names, aside from many that I've just mentioned, that would be the rationalist tradition, you would just off the top of your head, without having to think too hard about it, give me what names?
Other than this card.
Well, I mentioned Parmenides and Plato. So they're off limits. I want someone besides them.
Okay. Well, I think Descartes was a rationalist.
Descartes is a good answer. Any others come to mind?
Well, I don't know about the older ones, because I think Parmenides and Aristotle are kind of the first rationalists. I'm not really sure.
Who else? Thank you. Descartes is one good answer. Do not put Aristotle on this list. You put Plato on this list, not Aristotle. Yep.
Could you say Hume is sort of a rationalist, being that it says that's something that's still
No,
undermined?
you would think that, but Hume is actually the most rabid empiricist of them all. He's called the British empiricist, and he takes empiricism to its most radical extreme. You know, so I'm going to rule him out. Alicia?
I actually have a question.
Aha.
Wasn't Parmenides and Heraclitus empiricism and Parmenides rationalism, and didn't they already have this, didn't when they tried to synthesize, didn't it turn out to be skepticism? Or really,
Well, yeah, no, there was
tried?
skepticism until Plato.
Okay.
What you get are these conflicts, skepticism, conflict, skepticism, conflict, skepticism. So the sophist or the skeptical period following that impasse, right, between Parmenides and Heraclitus. You kind of get that rhythm, you know. So I just want another name. Josiah?
Spinoza.
Yeah, Spinoza. We didn't talk about him, but that's a name we can put here. The other names go here. Ben?
Leibniz.
Thank you. All right, good. We didn't talk about him either, but that's good. You know that that's where they belong. Any other names? Avery? Any other names? Nicole?
For rationalism?
For rationalism. No? Anybody else? Laura? There's one more big name that should be on the list. Megan?
Augustine.
Augustine, yes. All right, so you understand you've got this tradition coming down, and all of these people, while they differ among themselves, they have different perspectives, etc., they all share a kind of common view that you begin with the mind. Even Augustine's understanding of faith, you understand that's beginning with the mind, isn't it? To think with assent. Before I understand these things, I have to kind of bring my mind to it. That already shows a little bit of a rationalism going on. If we jump over to the other side of the ledger and say, okay, who are some of the empiricists that we've dealt with then? Krista, you'd throw up here on the board what names, just off the top of your head? No, I guess Aristotle is good. And Spencer?
Locke was an empiricist.
Locke, very good. And who else? Ben?
Berkeley.
Berkeley. And anybody else pop to mind? Nicole? Aquinas, very good. So, all right. So this is going on. This is philosophical history, and this is kind of the backdrop for our conversations all the way through this course. Everything changes at this moment. This man changes the game. And so we're not going to be talking anymore about this conflict, because in a sense, from this point on, the conflict looks different. The guy that changes it is Kant. So we have these two streams kind of flowing into him, and we're going to call Kant. Sometimes this is called, he's the great watershed. I don't know what a watershed is either. There it is. Pardon me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that sounds good. A watershed, yeah. European bathroom. Okay, so Kant is seeking to put it together. What arouses him to do this is his reading of, we didn't have this name up here, Hume. He realizes that Hume has plunged us into skepticism. That if Hume is right, we can really know nothing. And Kant wants to rescue us from nothing. Epistemological nothingness. He wants to give us something. He's also aware, however, that Hume himself is reacting to this tradition. He sees this whole thing. I mean, it's like Hume is the guy that sort of wakes him up, as he says, awakens him from his dogmatic slumbers, but he knows that this has been coming down the track for a long time. So he's trying to deal with that. So what happens after Kant? I'm going to treat Kant. We'll come back to it, but I just want you to see the big picture. What happens after Kant is you have a whole bunch of philosophical movements that all come spinning out of Kant in the 19th century. Okay, so we're kind of warming up now for 19th century philosophy. That is the 1800s. But all of these people have their roots in Kant. They don't look alike. They all take one little piece of Kant and run with that ball, you see. So, for example, out of Kant, we're going to get Hegel. We're going to get Marx. We're going to get Nietzsche. We're going to get William James. We're going to get Schopenhauer. We're going to get Kierkegaard. We're going to get all of these. You can read that, can you? Kierkegaard. It's all right there. We're going to get all of these people. And they all, in a sense, are getting their inspiration from Kant. Sometimes negatively. Sometimes the inspiration they get from Kant is to differ with him. But the point is, nobody's bypassing it. Nobody's going back and becoming a neo-Augustinian or something like that. Everybody is in some sense or other taking a slice of Kant and heading down the field with that as their centerpiece for their philosophy. And even in the 20th century, in fact, you could very much say that we all live to this day under the shadow of Kant. We are all Kantians in some sense. I don't think that's good. I don't like that. But I have to admit, I have him in my bloodstream, like it or not, and so do you. And so it's very helpful to get some feel for what's going on with this guy. So just understanding of history, the game changer with Kant. And he himself says that he represented the great blank, and Sarah gave it to us. He is the great what? What revolution does he claim to be? This was, I was glad Sarah is the first person. I've been teaching philosophy here for 8 years. This is the first time any presenter on Kant has said one of the most important things he said about his own philosophy. So Sarah, congratulations, I'm so impressed. And what kind of revolution is it, Ben? Copernican Revolution, that's what he called it. Kant saw himself as giving to Western thought what he called a Copernican revolution of the mind. So that's where I want to start in our little conversation about Kant. By the way, I call this discussion that we have of Kant in 6 easy lessons. That sound good? 6 easy lessons. Lesson number 1, Kant claims to be, as we just said, the one who created a Copernican revolution of the mind. So that's point 1. So just to make sure we understand this, let's go back and refresh our memories briefly about something we all know and love, and that is the original Copernican revolution. So Kayla, if I asked you to just quickly off the top of your head, say the fundamental content or meaning or significance of the Copernican revolution, the original one, what was it? What changed in the original Copernican revolution? Don't ask her, she doesn't know. Okay, need to know this. It is, Jordan, what?
Don't even remember.
Good heavens. Somebody keep me from jumping off a bridge. The original Copernican revolution is, Sydney, please.
They changed the view of the universe from a geocentric view to a heliocentric.
All right, anybody in this room that does not know that or remember it, I'm going to lynch you if you don't know this from this point on, okay? Have I gotten through? That is the Copernican revolution. Copernican revolution is that theory by Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, that the Earth is not at the center of the solar system. The sun is at the center. Heliocentricity. Okay, you all know that. Now, what Kant is doing has really nothing to do with the Copernican revolution. But the point is this. The Copernican revolution, the original one, changed everything. The whole view of the universe changed after Copernicus first, and then after Galileo confirmed Copernicus' view. Kant thinks he's doing in philosophy what Copernicus did in astronomy. He is changing everything. So from this point on, Kant thinks, no one's going to do philosophy the same way again, and he was right. Nobody has done it the same way again. And I might add, Kant had a huge impact on Christian apologetics, Christian philosophy, you see. We don't do it the same way anymore. I'm not so sure that's good. I'm not getting on that as a soapbox and saying, yay, Kant. I'm just saying it has, he's had that effect. So what did he change? Well, if the original Copernican revolution put the sun at the center of our astronomical speculations, get this, Kant put the human mind at the center of our philosophical speculations. One more time. If Copernicus put the sun at the center of our astronomical speculations, then Kant put the mind, the human mind, at the center of our philosophical speculations. We had always thought that philosophy was about understanding the world around us. We thought we were the observers. Here's Nicole. a philosophical observer. Not bad, is it? We're talking.
Some real bad soup.
That's right. Nicole, as all of us, thinking that philosophy is about understanding the world. So the notion is that here is Nicole and here is the world, and she's looking at the world and trying to figure out what is its character, what is its nature. Aristotle has categories, he has motion, he has all of these ideas about how the world works. Efficient cause, formal cause. All of that is describing the world around him. Even Plato, much more a rationalist, says that the world is a copy of an ideal world, but still it's understanding the world. You follow that? This is what's going on. And Kant comes along and says, no. The center of our philosophical interest is not the world. The center of our philosophical interest is that mind that is observing the world. And it makes the world, in a sense, much less important. This is what it's all about. This is the center. And from that point on, philosophy has been obsessed with the question of the mind and its operation rather than that which the mind is presumably observing. All right, so that is point 1 of 6 easy lessons in understanding Kant. All right, number 2. We, by the way, won't get through all these today. We probably will get just barely past number 2, if that. The second easy lesson in Kant is what I like to call the country kitchen. Jordan.
Yes.
I want you to sit up and look like you're awake, or else leave and go take a nap. But don't hang there in Twilight Zone, okay? All right. The country kitchen. The country kitchen is, something kind of like what I grew up in Grand Coulee. Now, Grand Coulee is a town. I want to make that clear. It is not the country. And of course, when I grew up in Grand Coulee, I thought I was living in the center of the universe, because that's what we usually think. We had all kinds of tourists that came in every year and looked at Grand Coulee Dam, and I thought, you see, that proves it. We're in the center of the universe. But I had to revise that opinion. But this little analogy does sort of work. It does remind me of others. Kitchen, because she had, and actually I could still, if we went on a little field trip, I could take you and show you all of her collection of jars. She's probably got 500 jars. Now, she doesn't have them, she's with the Lord, you understand that, but the jars are still there. And they all, I don't think there's any 2 jars that are quite the same. There's little ones, there's big ones, there's in-between ones. There's some that say curve, there's some that say ball, and there's some that are all kinds of different things I've never heard of. And it's all kind of this wonderful, crazy collection of all of these little jars, and she's been using those and did use them all through the years. Why did I staple that? It's like some kind of... I think somebody did that to me. Was that you? Did you do that? Yeah. All right, so now. The jars, when I was growing up, had content. So, if you walked into this country kitchen and looked at the shelf, you would see, here's a tall, skinny jar, here's a little fat jar, here's a medium-sized jar. Here's a kind of round jar. Here's a weird jar. You just look at these jars. There's just tons of them. They're all over the place. No two are the same. But what I'd also noticed, and what I was especially interested in, were the jars that had within them raspberry jam. That's what I wanted. And so I might notice that this jar had raspberry jam. This jar had what? What am I trying to think of? What? Apricot. Yeah, well, let's say, I don't think there ever was any of that. This jar might have beets. This jar might have, peaches, not so bad. And then another raspberry, and you know how it goes. And there were no particular order. They were just sort of up there, kind of in this chaotic, wonderful collection of stuff. Well, here's the deal. I might have a jar that looks like this, and a jar that looks like this, and another 3 or 4 jars that look totally different, and they all have in them raspberry jam. The content is the same, the container can differ, right? I could also conceivably have 2 jars that are the same, but they have different content. So, on the off chance there were 2 identical jars, one of them might have peaches and one of them might have raspberries. And so you can see there's a kind of mixing and matching phenomenon going on here. And the whole point of this is to say, Kant says this is kind of like what the human mind is doing. Now, Sarah discussed a posteriori and a priori reasoning. Remember that? A priori or a priori. And this is kind of getting at that point. For Hume, everything is posteriori. It's all of your thinking results from experience. Your thinking is triggered by sensation. Ideas in your mind are caused, although, of course, Hume doesn't believe in cause. But at this point, since we're not going to hold him to any kind of internal consistency, at this point he would say, sort of offhandedly, the ideas in your mind are somehow or other connected to, caused by, resulting from sensations, impressions. But nothing is there in advance. He takes that tabula rasa idea to its extreme. Not Kant. Kant is partially a rationalist. He's partially an empiricist. He's trying to put them together. The rationalism piece are these empty jars in your mind. Your mind is filled with empty jars. All those jars look different. In Kant's case, he says there are precisely 12 jars in your mind. 12. He calls those jars not jars. He calls them categories. But he means by that simply places where you put stuff. And that is the rational piece. That is what your mind is bringing to this experience of learning. You're bringing your jars, empty jars. And then stuff is flowing in. And sometimes the stuff flows in one jar, sometimes it flows in a different one. It's really difficult to say which jar may be the container for which thing, but something is flowing in from the outside and is being somehow distributed into these jars. And what I think of, I've got a little machine at home. It doesn't work anymore, but it used to be kind of cool. Whereas one of these machines that would sort coins, you know what I'm saying? And you pour your accumulated coins from the last 6 months into it, and it grinds. And the coins kind of all go down into little separate containers. The problem is, in your mind, there's no rhyme or reason. Stuff just goes into any container that happens to be there at the moment. So there's no necessarily predictable way in which this sorting will take place. But that's the concept. Get that idea that there's jars in your mind and something flowing in. That's point number 2. Jordan.
But So does Kant believe that does he believe tabula rasa, that you start with the blanks?
No.
No.
This is his answer to tabula rasa.
Oh, okay.
So he is not a pure empiricist,
Okay.
because Locke would say you don't even have the jars.
Okay.
You've got a blank slate, experience writes on the blank slate. He says, no, we all come with the same jars. And that affects deeply how we perceive what's happening.
Do we know what those are?
Yes, we do. Right. We'll get to that a little later. Stephen, did you have your hand up there a second ago?
Well, I was just wondering how you arrived at 12.
We'll talk about that a little later, Jacob.
So is this stuff going in, is that experience?
We'll save that. That's our next point. Good question. These are all great questions, and we'll get to them methodically, hopefully, yes.
So you said that when the jar's being filled up, it's just kind of random.
Sort
like,
of.
Are their jars filled up the same way with the same stuff, or does it depend on person to person?
It depends on the person, but it's a good question. He does say we all have the same jars. He never explains that. This is one of the odd little aspects of a guy as thorough and meticulous as Kant. He never explains why we all have the same jars. My personal opinion is he knew the problem was there and he didn't want to address it because it implied a theistic proof. And he was trying to destroy theistic proofs. And that was a little bit of an embarrassment because in fact, there's no good reason why we should all have the same jars. But we do. He just simply says it. And so even from his point of view, it implies that there must have been something behind that that's created this consistency among us so that we can have the conversation we're now having. Because in fact, if Sarah had very different jars from my jars, we couldn't even have a conversation. So different would be our view of things. So it is odd, but there it is. All right. Third lesson of the 6 easy lessons. And at this point I will just have to get it on the board. We won't even barely get this one going. But this is called the sausage grinder. Now you may think your philosophy teacher just supposed to be very clever to be coming up with these, and I have to tell you, frankly, these are not original with me. And I wish they were. I wish I could take credit for them. But this sausage grinder especially has been a standard analytical device to explain Kant for a long time. I don't know who first came up with it, but when I studied Kant way back in college, this was the analogy, and it's been around for a lot longer than that. So you will run into this again. If you take philosophy and you study Kant, somebody's going to mention the sausage grinder or the meat grinder or some such thing. So this is not a novelty, with me. But it does, I think, kind of help us explain what's going on. So, the point is, in simple terms, your mind is kind of like a sausage grinder. Okay, he's putting the mind at the center. That's our focus now. It's not easy. I think you understand the problem. It's one thing for me to think I'm observing something out there, observing Kaylee, observing Sydney, observing the room, the pictures on the wall. It's another thing to turn my gaze upon myself and try to observe the observer. That's a little trickier. We are subjects, not objects, from our own perspective. I mean, I can look at Trevor and say that is an object of my observation. But when I say, okay, I, the subject, observing this object, how do I turn around and observe the subject? That's tough. That's what he's trying to do. And what he says is when we think about this subject, this observer, at least one way to think about it is like a sausage grinder. Now, a sausage grinder, I'm going to kind of draw it here. What do I have? I don't have enough time to start this. So I'm going to just leave it at that and tell you that tomorrow we'll pick up with the sausage grinder. It is, of course, tomorrow you might call Friday. And one never knows what might happen. Fridays can be a little different, you know what I'm saying? So you might just keep that in mind when we gather together tomorrow. Any wisdom for the good of the order? Any thoughts? Any
Oratory time.
oratory? Not enough time even for a simple oratory. I had a pretty good one yesterday, but it wasn't, who was it? I told it to the 10th graders. I can't even remember what it was now. So, sorry, no time. No oratories today. I'll work on it. My friends, you are dismissed.